I never imagined that the longing to become a mother could take root so deep, cling so stubbornly to every ounce of one's reason and very sense of self. My marriage to Ahmed had been born of a gentle love, sweet memories and soft words, but beneath it lay a weight as heavy as brass shot. That love contained the dream of tiny footprints echoing through our home, of innocent laughter, of everything we'd seen in television ads, felt in family gatherings, or glimpsed when we chased after children pedaling past on neighborhood corners. For the first 2 years after our wedding, we lived on hope. I marked off each day on the calendar like a ritual, while Ahmed would smile and tuck each month's medical report into his office file. When our first ultrasound revealed nothing, we shrugged and spoke of timing, that perhaps we were still too young. But as the second year passed, whispers began to sharpen around us, critiques of my frail frame, misread as weakness, misinterpretations of Ahmed's patience as failure. Someone laughed as they delivered the question that pierces a barren woman's soul. When will your lap bloom? Ahmed would come home and offer me bouquets of consolation, pressing my hand in his and murmuring, God's will, Fatima, be patient. Yet beneath his reassurance lay an undercurrent of worry I could read in the crease between his brows, an anxiety only a spouse truly knows. I lay awake at night, tracing the ceiling with stifled sobs, wondering why my prayer went unanswered. In fits of desperation, I called my mother. In her trembling voice, she recited passages from Surah Maryam and prayed over the phone. But once I hung up, the blank walls seemed to erupt in silent taunts. What had I done to deserve this emptiness? I changed doctors, swallowed vitamins, endured hormonal injections, even submitted to a test so painful it extinguished the last flicker of hope inside me. I tried every conventional remedy, and then the extremes. Amulets pressed into my palm, whispered incantations at midnight, doves released in token ceremonies, water infused with repeated verses swallowed at dawn. Nothing altered the sterile zero on my doctor's report. It was then that Aunt Najma, new to the neighborhood, leaned toward me one evening with eyes glinting of certainty. 10 kilometers from here, she said, is an ancient graveyard beside the dervish Baba Abdul Hakim's shrine. He's a learned mystic. People swear by him. I saw my niece's problem vanish there. A shiver passed through me, as if some hidden flame inside me waited only for such a gust to roar into life. I paid no heed to the warnings echoing in my mind, nor to Ahmed's restless turning beside me that night, a sleep so uneasy it betrayed the tension gripping his heart. At the first light of dawn, I wiped my tears and made up my mind. We had exhausted every conceivable measure, so why fear a path the world called superstition, when perhaps it was my destiny? A few days later, Aunt Najma and I boarded a creaking coach bound for that forsaken stretch of earth. Brambles scraped at our sleeves, weathered tombstones loomed like silent sentinels, and the tang of wild onions hung in the air. A massive, gnarled gate, its wood swollen like the trunk of a plane tree, was draped in a faded green cloth. Crossing that threshold, the sharp, resinous scent of Loban struck me full force, making my head spin. Along the damp earthen walls hung swaths of silk cloth, fraying talisman threads and chalked Quranic verses half erased by time. In that dim, hushed sanctuary, every rustle of wind through the tombs sounded like a breath of promise, or a warning. A row of women sat beside me, gently rocking as they wept, sharing the scars of their last childbirth. I watched their faces, eyes brimming with blind faith, hope drowning slowly in their gaze. Then from behind a heavy curtain, Baba emerged. He wore a loose muslin tunic, his long beard tangled with dried basil leaves, and in his hand he held a prayer bead rosary whose pearls glinted like metal I'd never seen. The instant his eyes fell on me, I felt a cold line trace down my spine. He studied my forehead for what felt like an eternity, then murmured words I couldn't comprehend. Aunt Najma stepped forward to introduce me. This is Fatima, Ahmed's wife. She's been yearning for a child for 5 years. Baba closed his eyes, whispered something under his breath, and then announced in a voice that echoed off the walls. This sister bears a severe blockage. No ordinary recitations will break it. My heart leapt to my throat, but before I could protest, he ordered Aunt Najma outside into the courtyard. An exclusive ritual must be performed, he intoned. How will Ahmed know? I blurted, panic rising. Baba raised a bony finger to his lips. Do not speak of this to your husband. Doubt invites sin. Trust in God, and none shall learn of it. A fierce storm whipped through me, but Aunt Najma's grasp on my hand was unyielding, her certainty forcing me to follow him. He led me into a dim inner chamber. The curtain fell behind me, and the cries of women faded away, leaving only my ragged breath. My eyes adjusted to darkness, revealing a series of shallow dishes hung on the walls, each etched with animal hoofprints. A gray bull's hide was draped over one corner, and in the center burned a single scarlet candle. Baba sat cross-legged on the floor and intoned a chant in an alien tongue. Then he produced a small black vial and, turning it between his fingers, declared, "This is a potent elixir. Blossoms of the Bengali pomegranate, salt from the ocean's depths, and white saffron rich with blessings. Drink it, then lie down in silence." My hands trembled as I took the vial. A sharp, resinous scent rose from it, more than incense, closer to charred leather. My mind shouted to run, but my body was drained of strength. I forced the liquid down in one gulp. At first it tasted sweet, then my tongue dried into something like a thorn. The chamber spun before my eyes as though I stood on a storm-lashed sea. Baba's lips moved in slow motion, chanting, until darkness swallowed everything. After that, I lost all sense of time. Sometimes I would gasp for air as if awakened from a deep dive. Other times I'd shudder at a phantom chill in the dead of night. A hand tightened around my arm with startling force, a finger traced patterns across my brow. 4 hours felt like 4 centuries, or perhaps just 4 breaths. When I finally regained consciousness, the lantern's glow was faint. I sat up and fastened the buttons of my tunic. My chest felt hollow, echoing beneath sweat-slicked skin that didn't feel like mine. Baba stood before me, arms folded, a victorious spark in his eyes. Bending slightly, he whispered, "Congratulations, daughter. The ritual is complete. Your sorrow will lift." A child approaches. I managed to whisper, "I must go." And he pressed a small talisman sealed with wax into my palm. "Wear this around your waist. It will hold the iron-clasped block at bay. And remember, tell no one of this rite. If the secret is revealed, all will be lost." Stepping out into the dusky evening, Aunt Najma hurried to my side. "See how the light shines upon you," she exclaimed. "You'll have your happy news very soon, God willing." I only replied, "It's not light. It's a haze." Even my own voice sounded strange to me. A month later, I stood before the bathroom mirror, heart pounding, as 2 clear lines appeared on the pregnancy test. My palms grew slick with sweat and heat. At the clinic, the words "pregnancy positive" danced before my eyes like a dream. Outside, the sun felt different, less gentle, more intense. Ahmed arrived home that very evening. With shaking hands, I handed him the report and stammered, "God has answered." For a moment, he stood still, staring at the paper. Then he blinked, as if a veil of surprise lifted from his eyes. "Since when?" he asked in a voice as cold as ice. 2 months, I whispered. His face went the shade of bruised yellow. "But Fatima, for 2 months you know what I mean?" My legs gave way beneath me. I swallowed hard. "I swear to God, it's yours." He raised a hand to stop me. Slamming his fist onto the table, he let a single, crushing sentence fall between us. That evening, I learned for the first time that words can be knives, cutting the heart without drawing a drop of blood. In the days that followed, hope and explanations crawled through the walls like vermin. But Ahmed would neither hear my pleas nor tolerate my shadow. He summoned his mother and 2 witnesses, handed me the papers of divorce, and walked out, locking every memory we had shared behind him. I found myself alone in that pale yellow room, its ceiling fan as old as my broken heart. My being had split in 2, one half consumed by the grief of separation, the other half beating within me, a small life growing in the silent darkness of my womb. At night, I would shift my body, place a hand on my belly, and wonder how restless that heart must be, hearing the world whispering slanders against its mother's honor. Rent, rent. The rent for this vulnerable shelter weighed heavily on me. House payments, groceries. then the mounting medical bills all pressed down like stones. Yet astonishingly, I did not shatter. It felt as if a bundle of sturdy timbers burned within me, keeping me upright against the storm. Old midwife Nasirin Bibi, noticing my gaunt face, took me under her wing. On the coldest dawns, she would arrive with boiled eggs and warm milk, murmuring, "Child, your time is near. Draw breath, find strength, for your baby's sake." I followed her guidance, and slowly color returned to my cheeks, even as new life blossomed within me. Those 9 months passed like a mountain's slow melt, and I perched on that final peak, mending my torn clothes by hand, counting every turn of restlessness, each tiny flutter of life. When the baby kicked, I laughed through tears. The mix of joy and pain brought a sweetness no words can capture. Then came the night that cleaved me open and made me a mother. Nasirin Bibi looped a frayed rope from the rafters around my legs and urged me to push. With one fierce cry, a tiny body slipped into the world. Blood, sweat, that first gasp, they all collided in a single, shattering moment. I looked down at my son. He uttered a faint whistle-like breath, then fell silent, as if in that instant he had glimpsed the universe's secrets. I kissed his forehead. His eyebrows were just like Ahmed's. For a heartbeat, I imagined that if Ahmed stood there, his misunderstanding might have melted away. But Ahmed was forever outside my circle now. I decided to bind his name to mine, naming him Arham, mercy, so the world would never call him an orphan. Life resumed, stitched together with small joys stuck like calendar notes across the days, until one cool evening, a knock shattered my quiet. I cradled Aram on my arm and opened the door to find Baba Abdul Hakim standing there. The mystical hope had drained from his eyes. Now they burned with a cold, predatory glint. Behind him stood two young men, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, their eyes alive with fire. In a voice more command than plea, Baba demanded, "Give me the child. He is my blood. I will raise him in my wisdom." A volcano of ancient ferocity, stoked over 9 months, erupted within me. I slammed the door so hard, Arham cried out. Pressing him tight to my chest, I filled the house with my own thunder. "My child is my life. Your cruelty is cursed. Get out now, or I will scream until the world knows you're evil." Baba's venomous smile stalled in the crack of the door. "You know not how long my shadow stretches," he hissed. "It will reach your roof before you know it." I replied by reciting a verse from the Quran and blowing on my palm. For a moment he faltered, then turned away, but not before flinging a handful of dusty earth at my door. That night, sleep eluded me. I recorded my story on my phone's camera, forging false cries to steal my resolve. I would have proof. At dawn, I hurried to Aunt Najma's house. When she opened the door, she saw the fire in my eyes and perhaps remembered her own guilt. I told her in no uncertain terms, "Auntie, I am gathering the screams of every woman you shoved into that devil's cave. Help me, or tomorrow your name and face will spread across social media." Shaken, Aunt Najma agreed. Soon we began to track down the other women who, in fear of disgrace, had stayed silent. Together, we prepared to expose the darkness that Baba Abdul Hakim had woven around our lives. Some women arrived having been forcibly stripped and their unborn children removed. Others bore burn marks from smoldering frankincense pressed into their flesh. Some had been divorced by their husbands and left to wander door to door in shame. We gathered every one of them into a single room, recorded their testimonies in writing, and took them to our lawyer. Through Nasirin Bibi's help, I managed to secure an old camera phone, loaded it with fresh memory, and resolved to encircle Baba with my own evidence. We quietly enlisted police support. A Thursday was chosen, the day his shrine saw its greatest flow of visitors. That scorching Thursday afternoon, the sun burned like molten bronze. At the cemetery turnoff, we found the police van, officers dressed in plain clothes, waiting as our silent shield. I drew a deep breath, clamped my veil under my chin with my teeth, and clutching the phone in my hand, stepped toward Baba's door. Inside, the familiar haze of incense, the dim glow of lamps, and the hiss of whispered prayers greeted me. I turned my recording on, hiding the phone in the folds of my dupatta, and clicked record. My hand trembled, but my voice rang out clear. "Baba, my friend stands before you. She too yearns for a child." He motioned me closer. Bring her, he crooned. Let me bless her, and her womb will open. Turning toward me, I bowed my head and said, First, you must take my child as your ward here. With that, I pressed little Aram tight against my chest. Baba's eyes gleamed at the sight. He reached for him, his hand already poised to seize the baby. I screamed, You bastard! Hands off! My shout was my signal. 2 officers burst through the door, tackling him to the ground. He reeled back in shock as we shoved him aside. In his eyes, I saw the greatest surprise of all. A demon unprepared to be caught. It felt like a scene from a movie, but it was real. The police seized his talismans, the vials of oil, the blood-stained garments of the women. I sank to the floor in a trembling heap. Little Aram pressed his tiny hand to my cheek, as if to say, Mother, fear nothing. You have already won. In handcuffs, Baba Abdul Hakim was led into the police van, still mumbling broken incantations, perhaps searching for a rune to free him. But his power, rooted in our silence, had been shattered by our cries. That very evening, the local TV station blared the headline, Notorious spiritual healer Baba Abdul Hakim arrested for crimes against women. When my recording spread across social media, comments poured in by the hundreds, then the thousands. Some called me immoral, others hailed me a heroine. But most women, for the first time, spoke openly of their own abuses at the hands of so-called mystics. In court, our lawyer presented over 70 testimonies. The women stood in line, shoulders squared, voicing years of hidden suffering. When the judge delivered his verdict, life imprisonment and hard labor for the defendant, a hush fell over the courtroom as though the air itself were holding its breath. For the first time since those bleak early days, I felt the invisible weight on my shoulders lift. But my journey was far from over. That night, in the small courtyard of my home, I spread my dupatta on the earth, placed the Quran on top, and held Arham in my arms as I sketched a new plan in my mind. By morning, I had registered a little office under the name Fatima Fam Women's Help Center. On the first day, I announced to the neighborhood, any woman harmed by fraudulent spiritual leaders or mystics could come to me for help, not just encouragement, but legal recourse as well. I had no special religious training, no formal legal expertise, only my own story and the fierce drive to shelter others. By the end of the first month, 5 women had come to us. 11 more arrived in the second. When a local newspaper published my interview in the 3rd month, our numbers swelled by the dozens. We persuaded a lawyer to volunteer his services, and a psychologist joined us to tend to these wounded souls. And so a tiny spark of justice kindled into a blaze of hope for countless women, proof that even the deepest darkness can be pierced by one voice that dares to speak. I learned that when a nation's women awaken, an entire generation is uplifted. Love may have bound me to Ahmed, but the desire to become a mother taught me a war that cannot be fought without courage. Sometimes, late at night, when moonlight spilled onto the courtyard wall, I'd pull up a chair and sit staring at that distant sky, wondering how many other Fatimas still stepped into the trap of those false elders. In those moments, a new prayer would rise within me. O Lord, let my center become a beacon to light their paths so that no woman again stumbles into darkness. Then I'd run my fingers softly through Aram's hair and whisper, You are my mercy. You taught me to fight. I had thought that once the court's judgment came, my trials would ease. But the real test began when society heaped fresh accusations upon my shoulders. At first, a few neighbors who'd quietly congratulated me on Arham's birth would drop by, sit for a moment, and slip away. Gradually, their glances grew colder. Every casual comment slipped in the insinuation that I'd destroyed my home, and now threatened to wreck other families too. My lips would clench, but I remained silent. Even their soft murmurs felt like shards of glass against my skin, yet I vowed I would no longer soften. Twice a week, I visited the public hospital so that the women at my center could get their tests done affordably, the same place where months earlier, my own hollow ultrasounds had been charted. Now, when I walked its corridors, male nurses would elbow each other in hushed tones and smirk as I passed. Once, a young house officer in a white coat took my paperwork, flipped to my file, and remarked with a leer, Madame, your center's name is spreading fast. But beware, a woman's virtue can stir up quite the scandal in a man's mind. He tapped his pen with a conspiratorial tilt. I lowered my gaze, stoked a spark of fierce fire inside my chest, and remained silent. The hardest moment came when I saw the little storage room beside my rented office. Empty, silent. I imagined it filled with sewing machines teaching unemployed survivors a craft they could call their own. I went to speak with the landlord, and his 28-year-old son met me at the door. He measured me up and down, then said, "My mother insists on 6 months advance rent, and one condition: no work at night, no men allowed in after sundown." I explained that our team included a male lawyer and 2 male social workers who might need to come by with files. His face darkened. Leaning close, he whispered with a laugh, "You know, people are talking, so you'll need to keep things orderly." He emphasized the word orderly as if offering a secret deal. A chill crawled up my spine. I replied, "If you can't control your tongues, I'll find another space." As I turned away, he added softly, "You're famous now. Let's be honest." His eyes were cold as ice, then he shrugged and retreated inside. In that moment, I decided, I will never set foot in this place. My safety is worth more than any rental agreement. Men in the street began shouting from their doorways at night. One afternoon, after taking Arham to the doctor, I disembarked from the rickshaw to find 4 young men by the pawn shop fall silent as I passed. 2 steps later, muted laughter broke out and someone hissed, "Hey, aren't you the Bengali Baba's girl?" My heart ached to turn and ask why every stray man dumps the weight of his own filth on a woman's shoulders, but I held my tongue. That evening, when I returned to the center, I found scrawled on the outer wall in coal-black letters, "Den of Wicked Women." My breath caught, but I forced myself to pause, then remembered. What good is erasing words with pen and eraser? The mightiest reply is action. Under cover of darkness, I fetched a bucket of water, scrubbed the insult clean, and the next morning with chalk, I wrote in bold, "Sanctuary for the Innocent, Fatima Farm Women's Help Center." That simple flourish sparked 2 reactions. Students volunteered en masse, launching the hashtag #HadBelieveHer on social media. At the same time, rocks began tapping against my window each night. Then someone set up a fake Facebook profile, weaving my photos into salacious collages suggesting I was selling favors. My lawyer friend Salman told me, "This is cyber harassment. You need to report it to the FIA." And so the fight continued. But now I knew the truth. A single woman's courage can shatter a wall of lies. I smiled and nodded, though fear clenched my heart. How could I possibly spend my days running from court to courthouse? Yet I knew that if I backed down, these same people would prey on the girls still knocking timidly at my center's door, so I swallowed my pride and filed a formal complaint. A week later, news broke that the fake account had been operated by the landlord's son and his friends. The neighborhood elders managed to secure his release from the police station, but my reputation was vindicated. The allegations were baseless. The sharpest sting, however, came when I went to enroll Arham in the tiny madrasa beside the school. The teacher scanned my registration form, looked up at me, and quietly asked, "Why is the father's name blank?" I replied, "His father is alive but chooses not to participate in his upbringing." He folded the paper, clicked his pen closed, and said, "We'll teach him, but protocol demands a father's name." I answered carefully, "So the name on his ID is Ahmed bin Sami." Leaning closer, he whispered, "You know what people will say. We won't be responsible if trouble stirs here." His voice held more fear for his institution's reputation than compassion for me. I took back my form, gripped Aram's hand, and left. In that corridor, I felt as if the tiles cried out under our footsteps. We are not sinners, we are forced. During that suffocating humiliation, God sent me an ally. One afternoon, returning from the courthouse, I found a middle-aged woman in a pale shalwar kameez waiting at my door. She introduced herself as Soraya Attar. "I'm a life coach. Your story shook me. I've come to offer free workshops, and I can teach these women simple self-defense techniques." I welcomed her in. In the next moment, a woman who had once walked into my center, broken, found herself smiling at her own reflection for the first time. Together, we secured the windows with iron bars to stop stones hurled in anger, and Soraya hung a small bell by the door, its ring a ceremony of our shared courage. If anyone steps out of line, the whole neighborhood will hear our defiance. But the community had not yet changed. Each Friday after prayer, local youths would eye us with sneers outside the mosque. One evening, 5 of them gathered outside the center, pelted the tin roof with stones, and fled, shouting insults. I filed a report with the police only to be told, bring witnesses or no FIR. We persuaded a nearby shopkeeper to testify, but he apologized, terrified of ruined business. I exhaled deeply, realizing society fears not just criminals, but the truth itself. Days later, a fearless journalist arrived, proposing a documentary. I agreed. If our voices went wider, perhaps minds might open. He interviewed many survivors, chronicled my struggle, and laid out the court's verdict. When the film aired, a crowd thronged the center, some to offer thanks, some to volunteer help, and others simply to gawk. Among them was a burly, bearded man who stepped inside and said, "We're from the nearby mosque's administration. You do important work in God's name, but a few rules must be observed. Women should not speak publicly. That leads to chaos. Please enforce stricter veiling," or he let the threat hang. I replied calmly, "Hijab is every woman's conscious choice. My mission is to protect their voices, not to silence them." He muttered, "True chaos is a woman who speaks," and left. Was it warning or advice? The next day, I posted on the center's notice board in bold letters, "Here, every woman has the right to speak." Critics abounded. The cruelest blow came when a local scholar insinuated in his Friday sermon that my work was fitna, sedition. The following day, passing through the market, I overheard 3 women in a fabric shop whisper, "Isn't this the one whose scandal keeps growing?" I approached them, greeted them politely, and said, "If you have questions, ask me directly. Don't believe rumors." They glanced around, then one mustered, "We want to know the truth. Did you really have a child out of wedlock?" I drew a steady breath and shared my entire story. When the truth sank in, they stammered apologies. I realized that half-truths cooked by jealous tongues can poison reputations. That evening, I issued a press release and went live on the center's Facebook page, recounting every detail. The next morning, a short column appeared in the local paper. Fatima Fam tells the truth. Should society feel shame or change? Through all this clamor, there was still no sign of Ahmed. I often thought he might at least come to see Arham, but perhaps the wall of social shame stood taller than his courage. When I missed him most, I opened my Quran to Surah Ash-Shar and found the peace to carry on. One afternoon, as I was busy at the center, there came a gentle knock at the door. Before me stood Ahmed, gaunt, weary, his beard streaked with white. In his hand, he held a small bouquet, and in his eyes lay a burden heavier than words. For a breath, we simply stared at each other, forgetting to breathe. Aram, who had been playing with papers nearby, paused as he noticed his father. Perhaps it took him a moment to recognize their natural bond. Then, with innocent curiosity, he crept forward, clutched at my skirt, and hid. Tears welled in Ahmed's eyes. He offered a broken, tentative greeting, bowing his head as he said, "I won't ask for forgiveness, Fatima. My mistake cannot be confined to words, but please give me a chance, at least to spend time with our son." A flood of mixed emotions surged through me. Gently, I nudged Arham forward. Hesitantly, he reached out and touched his father's finger. And in that instant, 2 warm tears fell from Ahmed's eyes and splashed onto the floor. Silently, I prayed they might be tears of remorse rather than shame. From that day on, Ahmed came once a week. He would play quietly with Arham, tell him stories, then slip away. Our relationship was not healed, but transformed. He was no longer my husband, but he strove to be his son's father. The neighborhood refused to forgive him too. One day, as he passed by a tea stall, a group of men jeered, "Look, the jealous husband has come crawling back." Ahmed bowed and moved on without a word. From my window, I watched their cruelty, and I understood how easily society can splatter its darkness on anyone. Even after the police case, some of Baba Abdul Hakim's followers would not let go. When he received a life sentence in court, a mob gathered outside the courthouse, raising their hands in salute. "Long live our revered master." They flung copies of fatwa pamphlets at me. Police shielded me back into their van and drove me home. Sitting in my chair, exhausted, I thought, blind devotion can turn a tyrant into a god. That night, I resolved the center would no longer be merely a refuge for the exploited. It would become a citadel of education. I contacted 2 college professors from nearby institutions. By evening, they were teaching classes on fundamentals of law and critical religious thought. On the first day, only 5 women attended. 2 weeks later, the number had swelled to 25, some in burqas, others in jeans. I announced that our door would always stand open equally to all. After all, wherever light spreads, flies gather too. One night, someone doused the outer wall with petrol and tried to set us ablaze. A passing cobbler heard our screams, roused the neighbors, and together they doused the flames with buckets of water. The next morning, I hugged the cobbler in gratitude. He said, "Ma'am, I didn't listen to your speeches, but I saw the hope shining in those women's eyes as they left here. I thought I must not let that hope burn." I replied, "A debt of hope can never be repaid. I can only pass it forward." That very evening, I convened a committee and installed CCTV cameras throughout the center, along with a discreet police help button by the inner door. When the newspapers ran the story, some sneered that I'd turned the place into a barracks. I said, "My son, yes, it's a barracks, but the battlefield lies outside, and our enemy is not men, but ignorance." Slowly, our center's successes spilled beyond city limits. A TV channel produced a mini-series called Lights of Silence. One night, at 11 o'clock, my phone rang. A girl from Balochistan was weeping. She'd been raped, and her family was threatening to kill her to preserve their honor. I woke my lawyer friend, arranged her shelter in a safe home, and recorded her testimony via online session. Weeks later, the court granted her protection. That day, tears filled my eyes. My center's door had reached a stranger hundreds of miles away. I leaned against the wall and thanked God. But my city's test was not yet over. One evening, a bridal procession paraded past, drums beating and dancers swirling. As they passed my center's sign, someone murmured, "Why not bring the bride here for a blessing?" Laughter erupted and the crowd surged forward. I watched helplessly from the window until a well-educated young man stepped onto the groom's shoulder, placed his hand firmly on it, and declared, "This is a sanctuary for mothers and sisters. Speak with respect." Embarrassed, the revelers fell silent. For the first time, I saw a man in my neighborhood raise his voice on behalf of my cause. That night, I realized, even if social change crawls at the pace of an inchworm, it still moves forward. No story of a woman should be turned into mere moralizing fodder, yet that is the favorite pastime of those who prey on innocence. Internet bloggers painted my life in hues so foreign that I hardly recognized myself. One called me a repentant sinner, another a celebrity in piety's guise. At first their words cut like knives, but then my heart reminded me, only the truth that reaches the soul matters. The rest is just wind. Worst of all, those slanders emboldened some twisted men to leer at my center's gate, as if they expected their hidden lust to be fulfilled there. One afternoon, a man stepped across the threshold until Soraya Appa met him at the door with Bubby's wooden stick, tapping it sharply against the frame. "Sir, see..." "Sure," she warned. "Please take your filthy plight elsewhere. Here, our glass will expose your intention." He slunk off in shame, and the three of us laughed until our bellies ached. Afterward, we hung a banner inside the gate. Here, respect is not sold, it is built. Slowly, we transformed that cramped entrance into a little courtyard where children now scamper and play. Arhem, nearly 3, laughs like sunshine, and each time he does, the broken wires inside me reknit themselves into golden threads. One day, he ran a high fever, and I rushed him to the same public hospital where my own barren ultrasounds once lay cold on the charts. After prescribing antibiotics, the doctor sent me downstairs to collect the medicine. There, leaning against the railing, stood the same house officer who once made that long-ago leer. This time he stepped forward and said, "I didn't realize you'd do something so great. I've sent my sister to your workshop." I nodded quietly, and in that moment I thought, sometimes time is the most persuasive lawyer. But I knew teaching the law alone was not enough. Women need economic power too. So I contacted a microfinance institution, secured 3 sewing machines and supplies for embroidery, and we launched Rahmat Handicrafts. In our first month, 10 online orders arrived. With pure conviction, I reinvested 10% of our earnings into repairing the center. How strange and wonderful it was that the very families who'd once scribbled insults at our gate were now asking their daughters to learn embroidery through our Facebook page. They did not care who I was, only that the income was lawful and secure. Meanwhile, the district commissioner offered us an official support package to register our center as an NGO, granting us legal protection, but with government representatives on our board. We debated. Some colleagues urged, "This is our chance." I shook my head. My fear is that our voice will be silenced behind the government's veil. In the end, we agreed on a flexible charter guaranteeing our full autonomy in all center affairs. The deal was signed, and new resources poured in: cyber safety workshops, a legal aid clinic, a helpline number. The media dubbed us Women's Little Court of Justice. Naturally, dissenting voices rose again. Rumor spread that Fatima plans to collapse our family structures by fortifying women with rote laws. But when, for the first time, a powerful, abusive husband was imprisoned and his wife granted guardianship through our center's help, even those critics had to step back. People began to understand that lies have a short life compared to the soaring flight of truth. Yet every flight meets turbulence. Some nights I climb onto the roof to feel the cold wind, recalling that my story began with the longing to become a mother, a longing that still blooms in its original fragrance. I watch Arham learn new words, leap on his bed, count the stars, and I think, if I had not faced all that darkness, I would never have seen this light. Yes, I am weary, but my weariness is no burden. It is a magnet that draws other women in. One chilly morning, I spread a blanket on a wooden bench in our courtyard and handed out thermoses of tea. I invited every woman I knew to join. Today, I announced, we will write our own futures in loud voices. Yes, with our tongues, so that our walls may hear us. I began. I, Fatima Fam, declare that my past is merely my shadow. My courage stands far ahead of it. Then, cup by cup, each woman spoke. One vowed to return to school, another to learn driving and become a taxi driver, a third to keep her own household accounts. In that circle of words, I felt a fierce strength rise. Our voices sprouted 33 wings and lifted us all. I stared at the sky long after and realized, society is not my enemy. It is that child we once were, asleep beneath a blanket of fear, and I am here to wake her up. Often, I remember that night when the Bengali Baba sealed me with 4 hours of his dark ritual. Now, at the very sound of his chant, I open my Quran to Surah Al-Falaq, and the shadows shatter. Sometimes I ask why society hounds me so. I stood against oppression. I never invited sin. Then I understand. It is not easy to show the mirror to society, for the first face we see is our own, and many recoil at that reflection. No wonder some men avert their eyes when they pass, and some women step aside on the street. But then there are those shining exceptions. The shopkeeper who offered free water at our first workshop, the young man who silenced the bridal party, the cobbler who saved us from flames. These people are proof that the path of light always remains open, no matter how long the night.